I was 39 when I learned that betrayal rarely arrives like a storm. It arrives like routine, like a phone buzzing face down on a marble counter while your wife laughs too softly in the next room. Like your younger brother holding your gaze half a second too long at dinner, as if he is measuring what you know. Like your father, who built an empire on discipline, suddenly deciding that family dinners should happen every Sunday again, after 10 years of not caring whether any of us sat at the same table. From the outside, my life looked arranged by someone with taste and patience. I lived in a restored brownstone on the Upper East Side with my wife, Elena. We had been married 11 years, no children. Not because we had not tried, but because life has its own cold preferences, and after enough doctors and enough careful conversations in sterile rooms, we stopped explaining ourselves to people who asked with a smile that felt too bright. I had made peace with that, or something close to peace. Work gave us structure. Money gave us options. Habit gave us the illusion that loss could be managed if named correctly. My family owned Whitmore Capital, a private investment firm my grandfather started with shipping money, and my father turned into something sharper, cleaner, more feared. We acquired distressed companies, broke apart what deserved breaking, rebuilt what could still earn, and sold when sentiment became expensive. I had been in the business since I was 26. My father, Charles Whitmore, liked to tell people I had come in on the ground floor, which was absurd considering the building already existed. But in his mind, earning a place inside something old counted as birth all over again. My younger brother Adrian joined 6 years after I did. He was the kind of man people described as easy, which usually meant he knew how to make other people lower their guard without having to lower his own. He was handsome in a clean, forgettable way that improved dramatically after 2 drinks and dim lighting. Women liked him because he listened with his whole face. Men liked him because he never seemed threatened. Our father liked him because Adrian had mastered the art of looking harmless while wanting exactly what everyone else wanted. I did not dislike my brother. That would have been simpler. Dislike gives you warning. It makes you careful. What I felt for Adrian was more dangerous than that. I felt responsible for him for so long that I did not realize when responsibility turned into blindness. Elena used to say my family loved each other the way empires love provinces. Possessively, strategically, with ceremonies where apologies should be. I told her she was dramatic. She told me I was loyal in a way that bordered on religious delusion. Then she would smile, kiss my cheek, and ask whether I wanted wine. That was our marriage in miniature. She named things. I softened them. We met somewhere in the middle and called it understanding. She had her own career when I met her. Art advisory. Not the glamorous version people imagine, not champagne and auctions every night, but careful curation for wealthy clients with uncertain taste and unlimited budgets. She understood money because she understood vanity. She knew that the rich do not buy objects. They buy reassurance. She built a respected business out of making powerful people feel more intelligent than they were. I admired that. Probably because it looked different from what I did while serving the same hunger. We met at a charity dinner in Manhattan. She was seated 2 places away from me and spent half the night quietly dismantling the board president's remarks with such precision that I nearly laughed into my glass. After dinner, I offered to walk her outside. She asked whether I always looked that serious or whether I had mistaken philanthropy for a hostage negotiation. I married her 16 months later. For years, we were good, not perfect. I do not believe in perfect marriages, only well-maintained ones. We had seasons, intimacy, distance, repairs, resentment, the usual rotations. But I trusted the foundation. I trusted her judgment. I trusted the private language we had built from repetition. The way she touched my wrist once if she wanted to leave a room without making it obvious. The way she went quiet instead of loud when something really mattered. The way she stood beside me at funerals and boardrooms and all the smaller indignities in between, always seeming to know exactly how much of me the world was entitled to see. The first time I understood that something had changed, there was nothing dramatic about it. It was a Thursday in October, the kind of New York evening that makes the city look almost decent from a distance. Elena had said she was meeting a client downtown. I stayed late at the office because we were in the final phase of acquiring a regional logistics company in Connecticut, and the numbers coming in from due diligence were inconsistent in ways that irritate me more than they alarm me. I got home just after 10. The house was dark except for the kitchen. Elena was there, barefoot, leaning against the counter with a glass of sparkling water and a look on her face I recognized as restraint. "You're late," she said. "So are you." "I was home at 9. There was nothing accusatory in her tone. That was what made me notice it. Elena had stopped arguing with me about hours months earlier, not because the issue disappeared, but because she had grown tired of discussing the price of a life she had already agreed to live. I put my keys down and kissed her cheek. Her skin smelled like perfume and cold air. Something in me registered the fact that she did not turn toward me. "How was the client?" I asked. "Indecisive, expensive, exhausting. That narrows it down to all of them. Usually, that would have earned me half a smile. It did not." She took a sip of water and studied me in a way that felt less like affection than assessment. "Your father called," she said. "At home?" "On my phone." I looked at her. "Why?" "He said he couldn't reach you." "My phone was in a meeting." "He wanted to remind us about Sunday." "Since when does he remind anyone about dinner?" That was my thought, too. My father had recently resumed the old Whitmore practice of gathering everyone at his townhouse on Sundays. My mother had been dead 7 years, and for most of that time he treated family as a ceremonial obligation best handled at holidays and board votes. Then, 2 months earlier, he announced that Sunday dinners would be reinstated. No explanation. No discussion. Adrian showed up with his usual grin. I showed up because saying no to my father always costs more than the refusal itself. Elena came because not coming would have been interpreted as a message, and in my family, messages travel faster than facts. "He say anything else?" I asked. "No, just that he expects punctuality." I loosened my tie. "That sounds like him." She looked away then, out toward the dark window over the sink. "Yes," she said. "It does." I should have heard something inside that answer. I did not. You cannot hear a crack if you are still convinced the structure is sound. Sunday came gray and expensive. My father's townhouse on East 78th stood the way old money likes to stand, without visible effort, and with a hostility toward novelty so complete it almost passed for elegance. Elena wore a black dress that made simplicity look deliberate. Adrian arrived 20 minutes late, kissed Elena on the cheek before greeting me, and apologized to no one in particular. My father let the lateness pass, which in our family counted as intimacy. Dinner was served by Marta, who had worked for my parents since I was 14, and had seen so much that nothing in the world could surprise her any more. There were 4 of us at the table: My father at the head, me on his right, Elena across from me, Adrian on my left. The air felt staged before anyone spoke. My father carved lamb while discussing markets in Europe. Adrian made light remarks at exactly the right moments, the way a man does when he wants to appear relaxed and attentive at once. Elena drank less wine than usual. I noticed because I notice everything when I am in that house. Survival teaches precision. At some point, my father set his knife down and looked at me. "The Caldwell deal," he said. "Yes." "Where are we?" "Close." "That's not a number. It's the truth." He hated truth when it arrived without measurements. "I've seen the preliminary memo. Margins are thinner than they should be. Because the company was mismanaged for 3 years and we're pricing in the repair. We don't buy repairs, Julian. We buy value. We buy what can become value before someone else sees it." Adrian cut in gently, smiling as though mediating a difference that did not concern him. Julian's right on that point. The logistics footprint is stronger than it looks. My father shifted his attention to him. "Do you agree with the pricing?" Adrian dabbed at his mouth with a napkin. "I think if operations stabilize within 12 months, it works." "If." "Elena," my father said suddenly, turning toward her, "you've been quiet." My wife met his gaze with the smooth calm she saved for men who mistook their authority for charm. "I didn't realize I had views on regional freight strategy." "Everyone has views. The sensible know when to keep them hidden." She smiled faintly. "Then perhaps tonight I'm being sensible." Adrian laughed. My father did not. I should tell you that in my family, laughter is rarely spontaneous. It is positioning. It signals alliance, relief, contempt, or surrender. Never innocence. After dinner, my father asked Adrian to join him in the study for a minute. They disappeared with brandy. Elena and I were left in the drawing room with coffee and the kind of silence that begins politely and then grows teeth. "You all do this on purpose," she said at last. "Do what?" "Speak in tests." I leaned back in the chair. It wasn't that bad. She gave me a look that said I had mistaken familiarity for normalcy again. "Your father asks about business the way priests ask about sin. He's not looking for information. He's looking for weakness. He's old. He's dangerous. Both can be true." She stood and crossed to the fireplace, not because she was cold, but because movement gave her somewhere to put annoyance. "And Adrian. What about him?" Her back was to me. "Nothing." That answer, more than any other, should have stayed with me. Elena never said nothing unless the truth beneath it had edges. When Adrian and my father returned, the room shifted. My father looked satisfied. Adrian looked pleased with himself in a way he attempted to disguise as modesty. I remember thinking that perhaps they had settled the Caldwell financing structure. Or perhaps my father had finally decided to give Adrian more visible authority in the firm. Neither thought alarmed me. It should have. On the drive home, Elena was quiet. New York moved past us in wet reflections. When I asked if she was tired, she said yes. When I asked if something was wrong, she said no. Marriage trains you to hear the difference between no and not now. I heard it. I chose not to press. 2 weeks later, my father called me into his office at 9 in the morning. He still kept the corner suite on the 36th floor, even though the firm could have run without him by then if he had ever allowed the firm to imagine such a thing. His office smelled like leather, old paper, and control. He was standing by the window when I came in, hands clasped behind his back, the city arranged beneath him as if it had requested instruction. "Close the door," he said. I did. He turned. "How much time are you spending on Caldwell personally?" "Enough." "That isn't what I asked." 4 to 5 hours a day, depending on diligence." He studied me. "And the rest?" "The rest of what?" "The rest of your attention." I felt irritation before understanding. "You called me up here to discuss my concentration?" "I called you up here because distractions become expensive when ignored." That word hung there. Distractions. I thought of market noise, of the labor issue in New Haven, of financing pressure. I did not think of my wife. "Be specific," I said. He moved to his desk and sat. "You've been slower." "According to whom?" "According to me." "With respect, that's not evidence. In this office, it's enough." I stayed standing. That, too, was family. He sits. You decide whether to challenge the architecture or play your role inside it. "What do you want from me?" "I want to know whether your domestic life is interfering with your judgment." It was so far from what I expected that for a second I almost laughed. "My domestic life?" "Yes." "No." "Are you sure?" I stared at him. "Why are we having this conversation?" His expression did not change. "Because perception matters. There have been comments." "From whom?" "That isn't relevant." "It becomes relevant when my father starts auditing my marriage between board memos." He folded his hands. "Control yourself." That sentence has the power of a match dropped near dry grass when delivered by the right man. It was one of his favorites. He used it when emotion entered a room, and he wanted the advantage of naming it first. I breathed once and said, "What comments?" "People have eyes, Julian. Your wife is around the office more often. Adrian is handling more client-facing work. Appearances matter." Something cold moved through me then. Not suspicion exactly, more like the body's recognition of a shape before the mind agrees to call it danger. "Elena is rarely at the office." Rarely is not never. "And Adrian handles client-facing work because that is part of his job." My father looked almost bored. "Then there's nothing to discuss." He was dismissing me. More precisely, he was planting something and then dismissing me. He had done it to competitors for 40 years. Offer a line. Force the other man to either ignore it or become consumed by it. Either response creates an advantage. I should have walked out and forgotten the conversation. Instead, I went upstairs to legal, asked for copies of the most recent Caldwell access logs, and spent 20 minutes proving to myself that I was still rational. Elena had been in the office twice in the last month, both times for less than an hour, both times for legitimate reasons connected to an art placement consultation for a client we were trying to impress at a charity event. Adrian had accessed the Caldwell file 14 times in 3 days, which was high but not absurd given his role. I told myself my father was being what he always was, meddling, strategic, old. I told myself perception was his addiction, not my problem. That night, I came home early. Elena was in the library sorting papers and listening to Ella Fitzgerald. She looked up, surprised. "You're home before dark," she said. "I thought you might be having an affair." I said it dryly, with the kind of brittle humor that only works if the world beneath it is still intact. She did not laugh. For 1 full second, maybe 2, she simply looked at me. Not offended, not amused, something else. Then she set the papers down carefully and said, "That's a strange joke." My chest tightened in a way I could not justify. My father said something stupid this morning. Your father says something stupid every morning. Why is today special? He implied there had been comments about us, about you and Adrian. Her face changed so slightly another man might have missed it. The mouth went still, the eyes sharpened. Not fear, calculation. And what did you say? That he was being ridiculous. And do you believe that? The right answer there, the safe answer, the answer a husband gives when he wants the room to stay warm, was yes. Instead, I heard myself say, should I not? She held my gaze a moment longer than comfort allows. Then she turned away and began stacking papers that did not need stacking. I'm tired, Julian. That isn't an answer. No, she said quietly. It isn't. There are moments that only become clear in memory when you replay them with the knowledge you did not yet have. At the time, I told myself Elena was angry I had repeated something poisonous. I told myself she was offended that I had allowed my father's mind to enter our house. I told myself her restraint was dignity. What I did not allow myself to believe was that she had just heard the name of the man she was sleeping with, and needed 1 second to decide what version of herself to show me next. We ate dinner in a silence too controlled to count as a fight. She went to bed early. I stayed downstairs with a whiskey and a spreadsheet open on my laptop, reading the same line items until the numbers blurred into accusation. At 1 a.m, I went upstairs. Elena was asleep on her side, facing away from me. The space between us felt measured. I stood there longer than necessary, looking at the shape of my wife beneath the blanket, like a man trying to remember whether he had always lived in this room or had only just arrived by mistake. The next few weeks should have resolved everything. Instead, they made ambiguity unbearable. There were no obvious signs, no lipstick on collars, no secret second phones, no perfume that did not belong in our house. What there was drift. Elena's schedule became harder to predict. She used to tell me where she was going, not because I demanded it, but because married people with functioning regard for each other generally exchange basic coordinates. Now I got fragments. Client dinner, studio visit, late meeting, fundraiser planning. The details came unasked and over-explained, which is one of the oldest tells in the world. Honest people usually provide enough. Liars provide architecture. At the office, Adrian became more visible, not just to clients, but to my father. He was copied on decisions he used to hear about later. He was invited into rooms where strategy turned into power. When I raised this with my father, he said expansion requires delegation, and suggested that if I felt threatened by my brother's development, the weakness might be mine. I started watching the edges of things. I noticed Adrian and Elena texting once during dinner at my father's house, both glancing down within seconds of each other. I noticed that when Elena said she would skip the next Sunday because of an early Monday appraisal in Boston, Adrian announced 10 minutes later that he had a dinner in Tribeca and could not make it either. I noticed that when I mentioned a charity gala in December, Elena said Adrian had already told her he was considering sponsoring a table. That last one stopped me. When did Adrian tell you that? She buttered toast with maddening calm. At your father's. Last week. I was there all night. Then you must have been distracted. She said it lightly, but the sentence sat between us like a hand on a throat. I began doing what I always do when something feels wrong and cannot yet be named. I gathered information. Not illegal information, not dramatic. I did not hire a private investigator on day one. I did not put trackers on cars or break passwords or become a man from one of those cheap, vindictive stories where intelligence disappears the moment jealousy enters. I stayed with what was mine: access logs, calendars, expense reports tied to firm accounts, event schedules, car service invoices charged through Whitmore Capital when family transportation was billed to the company because old money loves fraud as long as it wears good manners. Patterns emerged slowly, then all at once. Elena and Adrian were in the same places more often than coincidence explained. Not everywhere. That would have been stupid, but enough. A donor breakfast at the Carlyle, a client dinner in Soho, a gallery opening in Chelsea, where Adrian had no reason to be except that a friend from Venture had suddenly taken an interest in contemporary sculpture. They never arrived together, never left on the same reservation, but their names kept appearing in the same orbit, and timing is a language if you know how to read it. I told myself there could be explanations: professional overlap, social convenience, family proximity. Yet every explanation required more faith than the facts. Then something happened that made faith feel childish. It was late November. My father hosted a dinner for a group of investors from London, and because he still believed wives improved optics without being considered full witnesses, Elena attended. So did Adrian. I spent most of the evening trapped in conversation with a man who had made a fortune in copper and mistook cynicism for depth. At some point, I looked across the room and saw Adrian speaking to Elena near the terrace doors. Nothing about the image would have mattered to anyone else. They were not touching. They were not standing too close. But Elena's face was different. Softer than it was with most people. Sharper, too. Attentive in a private way. Adrian said something. She looked down, smiled. Not the polite smile she used for clients or donors or my father. Something smaller. More real. He touched her elbow once as he moved past her, and she did not flinch. The room kept moving. Glasses, laughter, deal talk, old money-performing sophistication around imported flowers. I stood there with my drink in my hand and understood with perfect clarity that I was either losing my mind or standing inside the last moments of a life I had mistaken for permanent. When we got home, I asked her. Not directly. Not yet. Cowardice and hope often dress alike. You and Adrian seemed deep in conversation tonight. She removed her earrings in the mirror. Did we? Yes. He was talking about a collector interested in post-war pieces. Since when does Adrian care about post-war pieces? She met my eyes in the mirror. Since men learned that saying the right nouns in front of wealthy people can make them millions. That was clever. That was Elena at her most lethal, true enough to disarm, sharp enough to punish. Do you like him? I asked. She turned then. Adrian? Yes. As a person? As whatever you want the question to mean. A long silence. Then she gave me the kind of look one reserves for men who have arrived at truth by accident and do not know whether to touch it. He's your brother, she said. That isn't an answer either. No, she said. It isn't. I slept 2 hours that night. The next day, I called Nathan Mercer. Nathan had spent 12 years in federal investigations before deciding private clients paid better and lied with more style. He had done discreet work for Whitmore Capital twice before. Background verification, internal leaks, one executive who liked billing escort payments as strategic entertainment. He was expensive because he was careful, and careful men are the only ones worth hiring when the truth can destroy multiple lives at once. We met in a coffee shop on Madison that was too polished to invite eavesdropping. Nathan looked like a man accountants trust and women forget immediately, which is a more useful face than beauty if your profession involves being ignored. "I need discretion," I said. He stirred his coffee. "You usually need deniability. Discretion sounds personal." "It is." He waited. "My wife," I said. "Possibly my brother." He did not react. Men like Nathan know that surprise is a tax paid by amateurs. "What do you want?" "Facts." "How far do you want to go?" "Legal." Quiet. Efficient. He nodded. "You have anything concrete?" "Patterns, timing, shared events. Nothing I could put in front of another human and remain dignified." Dignity is rarely part of this process. "I'm aware." He asked for names, schedules, cars, the usual coordinates. I gave him what I had. When I said Adrian's name, Nathan finally looked up properly. "Family business?" "Yes." "That complicates containment." "I know." "No," he said. "You know it complicates emotion. Containment is different." I almost smiled. "Can you do it?" "Yes." "How long?" "Depends on how careless they are." That answer sat with me for the rest of the day. Careless. I had not yet decided which possibility was worse, that they were being careful, or that they thought me too blind to require it. The first report came 4 days later. Nothing explosive. Photographs of separate arrivals to overlapping events. Car services booked within 20 minutes of each other. One lunch in Tribeca where Elena entered a restaurant through the front and Adrian through the side patio 8 minutes later. They left separately 46 minutes apart. Not proof, but enough to strip comfort from coincidence. Nathan's note at the bottom was short. Continued surveillance recommended. Behavioral discipline suggests existing pattern, not isolated contact. I read that sentence 3 times. Existing pattern. There is a particular kind of pain that does not feel like pain at first. It feels like clarity forced into the body too quickly. I sat in my office with the report open and discovered that rage is not always hot. Sometimes it is glacial. It narrows the world. It makes every object look cleaner, harder, more final. I did not confront anyone. Not yet. Information first. Action later. Emotion, if possible, never. At home that night, Elena was in the kitchen making pasta with music low and sleeves rolled to her elbows. Domesticity is obscene when it arrives beside betrayal. I watched her open a bottle of olive oil and thought, with an almost clinical detachment, that this woman might be sleeping with my brother and still asking whether I wanted Parmesan. "Long day?" she asked without turning. "Yes." "Mine too." I took off my coat. "Doing what?" She glanced back, smiling faintly. "Working. You remember that word." I walked over, took the wine glass from beside the stove, and drank from it. She watched me. "You're in a mood," she said. Maybe I'm tired of not knowing what room I'm standing in. Something in her expression shifted, but she recovered quickly. "That sounds dramatic." "Does it?" "Yes." "And if I asked whether there's something you want to tell me?" "I'd ask why you're asking." "Why not answer?" "Because questions deserve context." That was the problem with loving, intelligent people. They know how to turn every truth into a procedural dispute. I set the glass down. "Do you want this marriage?" She looked at me then, truly looked. For a second, I thought I saw sorrow. What I saw might have been irritation, or guilt, or fatigue. Betrayal ruins interpretation before it ruins anything else. "That's not a question you ask over boiling water," she said. "It's the question I'm asking now." She turned the stove off. The kitchen went quiet except for the faint hiss of cooling metal. "I don't know," she said. If she had slapped me, the result would have been cleaner. "You don't know?" "No." "Since when?" She crossed her arms. "Since I got tired of being managed." I almost laughed from disbelief. Managed. Yes. Scheduled around. Deferred. Spoken to like I'm one more component in a life you designed around work. I built a life for us. You built a machine and assumed I would always be willing to live inside it. Then say that. If you're unhappy, say that. Don't stand in my kitchen talking like a consultant delivering a memo. Her jaw tightened. You want honesty? Fine. I have been lonely for a long time. There it was. The preface every betrayal writes for itself when discovery begins to close in. Loneliness, neglect, emotional absence. They are not always lies. That is what makes them useful. Is there someone else? I asked. Her eyes moved to mine and stayed there. No, she said. The lie was so calm it almost made me admire her. Nathan called me the following Monday at 6:40 in the morning. I have something, he said. I was already dressed for the gym, one hand on the knot of my tie because routine becomes superstition when life starts slipping. What? Your brother spent the night at a condo in Tribeca, registered to an LLC tied to one of your father's holding companies. So? Your wife arrived there at 8:17 p.m. and left at 6:12 this morning. I did not speak. Julian, I'm here. You want the photos sent now or later? Now. When the message came through, I looked at the first image and felt the world reduce itself to a single point. Elena, in a camel coat, head slightly turned, entering a discreet side door. Adrian arriving earlier. No hat, no attempt to conceal his face. Elena leaving in the pale gray light of dawn wearing the same coat, and yesterday's expression rearranged into neutrality. There are moments after truth lands when the body becomes purely practical. My mind did not race. My hands did not shake. I sat on the edge of the bed and thought, in perfect stillness. So, this is who I have been married to. So, this is who my brother has always been. So, this is what my father either knows or is about to regret knowing. I canceled the morning gym session. I went downstairs. Elena was in the dining room with coffee and her laptop open, reading emails as if she had not just spent the night in another property owned, directly or indirectly, by my family. Morning, she said. I looked at her. Really looked. The woman I had built rituals around. The woman who knew where my mother's letters were kept. The woman who had held my hand at my father's 60th birthday and pressed once, lightly, when she knew I wanted to leave. She looked back at me with the calm of someone who still believed timing belonged to her. Morning, I said. That was the moment I decided not to confront her at home. Not in the room with our wedding photographs still framed on the console and the flowers she liked cut short in heavy glass by the window. She had brought something rotten into the architecture of my life. I would not give her the gift of watching me collapse inside it. I went to the office and called Nathan from behind a closed door. I want everything, I said. You already have enough. I said everything. He was quiet a second. Understood. Then I called the firm's general counsel and asked for a confidential meeting that afternoon. Not about marriage, about governance, access, fiduciary exposure, and undisclosed use of firm assets. I did not yet know how wide the contamination ran, but I knew enough to understand that this was no longer just adultery. Adrian had used an LLC linked to my father's holdings. If my father knew, that became one kind of war. If he did not, it became another. By noon, I had the occupancy records for the condo. Adrian had been using it irregularly for 9 months. 9. Elena's car service history aligned with 6 evenings there in the last 11 weeks. The first one was on the night of our anniversary dinner, which we had postponed because she said a client emergency kept her downtown. I remember that detail because it was the first thing that made my anger feel old. Not new, not fresh, but retroactive. She had already been gone while I was still making excuses for her. At 3, I met with Daniel Hargrove, General Counsel for Whitmore Capital, a man so careful with language he could make arson sound administrative. I need a discreet review, I said. Of? Use of firm-affiliated property by Adrian Whitmore without proper disclosure, potentially involving a related party conflict. Daniel watched me over steepled fingers. He was not a fool. Personal or financial? Both. Which do you care about more? The one that lets me act fastest. That earned the smallest nod. What do you need? All access records tied to Adrian for the last year. Any authorizations granted by my father or family office staff. Car service, petty cash, reimbursements, entertainment accounts. Quietly. Daniel was silent for long enough that another man might have grown defensive. I did not. He finally said, "If this touches family directly, discretion will have a short shelf life." I'm not asking for longevity. What are you asking for? A clean map before the room catches fire. When I left his office, Elena texted me. Dinner tonight? Thought we might actually try speaking like civilized people. I stared at the screen until the irony almost became funny. I wrote back, I have a late meeting. Don't wait up. It was true in more ways than she understood. That evening, Nathan sent a second packet. More photos, more dates, enough to prove not just an affair, but routine. Hotels once in Brooklyn, twice in Tribeca, once in a house in Sag Harbor registered to another shell company adjacent to family assets. They had built a system, not reckless, not impulsive, sustained. Near midnight, another message arrived from a number I did not recognize. We need to talk, tomorrow, before he does something stupid. No name. I read it twice, then again. The message had the cadence of someone who assumed context would do the work. Not Elena. She would never be that imprecise. Not Adrian. He preferred conversation when he believed charm might still carry him through, which left one man. My father. He had known. The realization did not wound me the way discovering the affair had. It settled into place almost naturally, like a final piece in a design ugly enough to explain itself. The sudden family dinners, Adrian's increased visibility, the half-spoken comments, the condo tied to family holdings. My father had known enough to manage proximity. Maybe he believed he could contain it. Maybe he believed I was strong enough to absorb it. Maybe, and this was the version that came closest to fitting him, he had not yet decided which son he preferred, and wanted more information before choosing. At 7:15 the next morning, I was in my father's office before his assistant had finished setting down his tea. He looked up, unsurprised. "Close the door," he said. I did. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The city behind him looked colorless. He sat where he always sat, inside a room designed to remind men that power could age without softening. "You knew," I said. He did not ask what I meant. "Sit down." I remained standing. "You knew," I repeated. He inhaled once through his nose, the closest he came to visible annoyance. "I knew there were concerns." Don't insult me. Then don't force me to speak to you as though you're a child. The calm I had spent 24 hours constructing held, but just barely. You put my wife in a property controlled by this family with my brother. I did no such thing. You authorized access. I allowed Adrian use of a discretionary asset. For what purpose? His gaze hardened. Careful. No, you be careful. There was no room left for family theater now, only inventory. How long have you known? He looked past me briefly toward the window, as though the city might offer language more useful than truth. Long enough. Something inside me went still. And you said nothing. What would you have preferred? Hysteria? I would have preferred not to be the last man in my own family to learn who was in my marriage. That landed. He did not show it, but I saw it. You're emotional, he said. Yes. That is precisely why timing mattered. I laughed then, once, without humor. Timing. You are leading a major acquisition. The firm cannot afford instability at the top because 2 people behaved badly. 2 people. I stepped closer to the desk. You mean my wife and your son? I mean the adults involved. No, you don't get to make this abstract. His voice cooled further. You're not the only one affected. There it was. The confession hidden in instinct, not morality. Optics, succession, exposure. He had not kept the secret to protect me. He had kept it to manage outcomes. Did you intend to tell me? Yes. When? When there was a solution. I looked at him and understood, perhaps for the first time in my life, that my father's love had always been adjacent to utility. Real enough to exist, conditional enough to curdle under pressure. What solution? He held my gaze. A separation, orderly transition, Adrian moving to Geneva for the European Fund. Elena compensated quietly. You retaining operational control, minimal scandal. He had planned my humiliation like a restructuring. For one dangerous second I saw how easy it would be to clear his desk with one sweep of my arm, to let rage become physical and primitive and honest. Instead, I smiled. It frightened him more than anger would have. You made plans for my wife and my brother behind my back. I made plans for the firm. The firm. Yes. I nodded once. Good. He frowned. Good? Because now I know exactly what this is. And that was the moment the door opened behind me. I turned. Adrian stood there, one hand still on the handle, dressed in navy, composed, almost pale. For a second, no one spoke. Then my brother looked at me and said, "Julian, let me explain." I remember every detail of that instant. The leather chair behind my father, the silver tray of untouched tea, the angle of Adrian's tie, the expression on his face. Not shame, not quite. Something worse. A hope that language might still rearrange consequence. I looked from him to my father and back again, and understood that whatever came next would not be repair. It would be selection, exposure, ruin, perhaps, but not repair. I said only one thing. No.